Right, good morning, boys and girls. Might not be morning where you are, but anyway, today we are going to be looking at the Industrial Revolution. Okay, so looking at the picture, we can kind of get an idea for what this might mean. But first of all, we're going to take a look at what are our goals today. Well, our first goal is to define what the Industrial Revolution was. So to actually be able to explain what is the Industrial Revolution. What do we mean when we say the word Industrial Revolution? Okay, next is we're going to explain the main changes of the revolution. So what changed in people's lives from, let's say, a part before the Industrial Revolution, maybe in the middle of the Industrial Revolution, and then at the end as the Industrial Revolution ends and we sort of move into what we consider our more modern kind of history. And then we're going to suggest positives and negatives that came out of the Industrial Revolution. So I'm sure after this we'll be able to see, well, what were the really positive things and what were the negative things to do with the Industrial Revolution. So today our whole point is to explore what changed in the Industrial Revolution. So let's kick off and get started. Okay, first of all, what I want you to do is I want you to take a look at these two pictures. So one depicts a typical town in the 1750s, and one depicts a typical town in the 1900s at the end of the Industrial Revolution. Okay, so what I would like you to do is I would like you to put down any differences that you can see between the two pictures in the comments below. It would be lovely if you could do that. That would be fantastic. I'll try and leave them open this time so you'll be able to reply in them. So what changes can you notice? You can pause the video now, and if one person could maybe, if you can come up with 5 or 6 um, differences in the two pictures, that would be fantastic. Okay, I'm just going to let you pause the video for a second, and you can do that. Okay, so if you could categorize them as well, so if you could categorize them into transport, housing, different things like that, that would be fantastic as well. What do you think caused them? Hmm. I'd love to hear your answers below if you could put that as well. And what the consequences might be. So what is different about the two? Okay, so take a bit of time. Maybe you can, I'd love if people could answer some of these questions in the comments below. It would be fantastic. I'd love to be able to read them out. Okay, so presuming you've done it, I'm just going to take a look at a few differences. One thing I noticed first of all, in the top left corner, I saw the ships. What were the differences in the ships? Maybe differences in some of the housing, the way the town is laid out, the way things are made. I wonder what's that there and what are these over here and what's the difference between the two? Okay, transport as well. Hmm. Okay, fantastic. I'm really looking forward to seeing some of your answers there. Okay, first we need to define what the Industrial Revolution is. So, the growth of industry in Britain in the 1750s to the late 1800s. When we're talking about the Industrial Revolution, we're talking about the growth of industry. Britain began to make money from products which it made rather than it grew. So that we're talking about things that it actually built rather than things that it grew out of the ground, which would be like, well, food mostly, or cotton and, well, not cotton, but different things they might have grown. Um, fantastic. So what does it mean? So industry basically means like construction, making things. And the word revolution is a word, well, we might remember this from our French Revolution. It's something that changes drastically and really, really quickly. Of course, really, really quickly for history can be 200 years. But in this case, some of the biggest changes that changed the world happened in the Industrial Revolution. So let's take a look at what they might be now. What were those huge changes that happened because people could make things differently? Okay, so what changed? Well, we're going to take a look at 5 things now. So we have population, how many people live in a place, um, work, transport, health and medicine, living conditions, and they're the 5 things we're going to take a look at. So normally I would do this as an activity where we cut up cards, but today, because of, well, the situation we're in, we're just going to have to do it together, sort of like a story. So we're going to take a look, first of all, at population. Okay, so population. So we're going to take a look at what differences happened in the Industrial Revolution in Britain between 1750, 1825 and 1900. Why Britain? Well, Britain is where the Industrial Revolution started, and at the time Ireland was part, well, certainly by the second answer here, Ireland was fully part of the United Kingdom. The country at the time was called the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland. Okay, so the whole of Ireland was part of the United Kingdom. Okay, so let's take a look at 1750. Okay, so at the time there were 11 million people in Britain. Okay, 11 million people, and at that time, about 4 million of those, a little less, but was about 3.5 million of those were Irish. So you can see Ireland was a good chunk of the population of the whole United Kingdom there. So by 1825, there were 21 million people living in what would be the Union of Great Britain and Ireland. And at that time, 8 million of those people were Irish. So that makes us think that really at the time, Britain didn't have a huge population lead on Ireland. But maybe if we studied some of the terrible things that happened in Ireland in the coming years after 1825, we can have a good idea of what's going to happen next in Ireland and what's going to change in Britain. So let's take a look at 1900. Okay, so there was a population of 40 million in Britain, and at that time, only about 3 million of those were Irish. Of course, that's after the Great Potato Famine. So you can see the change in population in Britain, just the population absolutely exploded. There was a lot more people living in Britain at the time because of all the fantastic developments that allowed more people to live, for the people to feed more people. And let's take a look at how that happened now. Well, work. With all those extra people, how did the people work? What changed in the way people worked? Okay, so in 1750, farming was the most common job. About 90% of people were farmers at the time. Even people who had other jobs did some farming to grow their own food. So even if you worked in a town making things, you'd likely have a patch of land where you would grow your own food to make sure you kept food on the table in 1750. By 1825, there were a lot of farmers, but many people worked in coal mines and ironworks and factories. So you can see factories starting to take off. People's jobs changed. People would work in factories or in coal mines or in ironworks, and then they would use the money they get paid in wages there, and they would use that money to buy food for themselves. And then so about 50% of people lived in large towns by 1825. And by 1900, most of the machines in the factories were driven by steam power. Hardly any used water wheels, so that's why we saw all those chimneys and smokestacks in the second picture a few moments ago. So steam power was more reliable than water power. So if you can imagine, if you have a water wheel that's like it's like a wheel that turns in a river. But if the river is not flowing quickly, your wheel doesn't spin at the same speed constantly. Whereas with steam power that you power by coal, if you need something to move quicker, you just add more coal to it, and it'll do more work for you. So you can see a change from people working basically only with their hands and the tools that they could use to suddenly big factories with large machines powered by coal. So transport, obviously how people got around would change a lot between 1750 and 1900. So in 1750, at this time, the only way to travel around Britain was on foot or by horse or boat. It took 12 days to get from London to Edinburgh. So that's basically from the bottom of the country to the top. So a long, long time on rough, windy roads that were in poor condition. And realistically, by horse, by cart, or by boat, it's the same way people had traveled for thousands of years. So you could rewind time a long time before that, and it would still have taken the same amount of time. So people traveled at the same speed they would have for a long time, but things were about to change. Okay, so at this time in 1825, many canals were built. Roads had been improved. It took 2 days to get from London to Edinburgh, so that's a big decrease from from the 12 days in the past. Canals were really useful as well because you could put so many things on the canal boats, much more than a horse could carry. You could fill them up to the top if you're sending coal or whatever you're sending down the canal. Be much you could send much more if it was by boat rather than by the horses that would have had to pull it in the past. And then by 1900, there were fast railways all over Britain. It took 9 hours to get from Edinburgh to London by train. So you can see how the transport changes happen there. So going from 12 days to get from one side of the country to the other to now just 9 hours. So you can imagine, and now even less. Like if you think of modern times, we can use planes, and that journey would be less than an hour. So that's kind of as time goes forward, we seem to have become much quicker at traveling from place to place. Okay, health and medicine. So let's take a look. So in 1750s, there was a lot of killer diseases such as smallpox. Operations were painful because patients were awake. So you can imagine if you hurt yourself, the operation to uh, to get yourself healed could have been very painful. There was no way of dulling the pain, and diseases would have killed thousands of people every year, so if not more. So that's part of the reason why in 1750 the population was so much lower. In 1825, doctors had found a way to stop people catching smallpox, so that was called vaccination. This was really important. Probably the biggest change was vaccination, and you'll probably hear a lot of talk of vaccination and vaccines at the minute with the situation that we are in. And then by 1900, doctors could stop people catching many killer diseases. Doctors knew how to put someone to sleep during an operation, so that's what we call getting an anesthetic or being anesthetized. I think that's how you pronounce that word. Anyway, so you could be put asleep for your operation, so you wouldn't have to feel the pain, and it meant the operations were much safer for the doctors as well. So this is part of the biggest reason why more and more people were surviving into their older age and having more babies, and those babies were surviving more. So that's why the population exploded as it did. Okay, living conditions. So how people lived. So, at this time in the 1750s, no one knew that dirt and germs made people ill. A lot of babies died before their first birthday. A lot of women died having babies. So you can imagine it was just a much more dangerous time to live. That's why the population was so much lower again. By 1825, people did not know that dirt and germs made them ill, so things didn't change much. So that idea that we cleaning our hands, washing our hands protects us from germs and disease and keeping clean isn't as old an idea as you would expect it to be. In towns and cities, people lived in dirty, crowded places. Killer diseases were spread through water and germs. So we talked a little bit earlier in the year about people getting cholera from dirty water, and that would make them really sick and often die because of it. Okay, in 1900s, people knew that dirt and germs made them ill. Water was piped into towns and streets were cleaned up. Sewers were improved. Killer diseases were less common. So they still happened. Of course, in the 1900s, a little bit later, we would have the Spanish flu, but they were far less common than they would have been in the earlier years. Okay, so there are the main changes of what happened in the Industrial Revolution. So I have a special task for you now. So was the Industrial Revolution a good thing or a bad thing? I wonder, could you think of maybe two positives and one negative? You can think of the pictures that we saw in the beginning or any of the changes that we went through there. Could you guys, nearly like 2 stars in the wish, can you tell me 2 positive changes that happened to the world since the Industrial Revolution, and maybe one negative thing? Is there any negative things? So try and be creative with that one, please. Again, if you could put it in the comments below, that would be fantastic. I might also do a poll in the corner that asks you, do you think the Industrial Revolution had more positive or negative effects? And you can tell me now. I know I'm going to vote for positive there because I like having more and more stuff, but maybe you think we should all live in the countryside and live simple lives. I don't know. I'll leave that up to you. Okay, and your final task. So imagine you are Mr. or Miss Average and you've traveled from 1750 to 1900. Write a diary explaining the challenges that you can see. So we're going to do this like a bit like the Olympics, because the Olympics are cancelled. We're going to have our own ones. Okay, so if you want a bronze medal, you have to describe 3 main things that they saw changed. Okay, so it doesn't need to be too many, but describe 3 main changes. If you want a silver medal, explain in detail 5 differences between 1750 and 1800s. So it's 5 differences. And if you want a gold medal, I'd like you to suggest in what way life might be better and worse from 1750 to 1900. So have your character thinking about the good and the bad. So here I'll give you the opening line. I can't believe it. Here I am in 1900 and the world has changed more than I ever imagined. Dot, dot, dot. How are you going to finish that? I wonder if you guys could put that in your, I suppose, the new homework copy, as we're calling it. That would be fantastic. And I'd love to hear some of those as well. If you could send them to me, that would also be fantastic. Okay. Right, guys, I'll include in the link below a few links to some videos that you might find interesting about the Industrial Revolution. And the next lesson we'll be learning about some of the inventions that changed the world. Things like the steam engine and different inventions that were invented that allowed people to make more things. Okay, so let's take a look at our goals from the beginning. Define what the Industrial Revolution was. So are you able to tell me what the Industrial Revolution means? Okay, if you said something like it's a big change in how we made things and how people's lives changed as a result of how we were making things, really in factories. Absolutely, you're absolutely right. Okay, explain the main changes from the revolution. So if you can talk about, well, what are the biggest changes in transport? Well, people went from using horses to canals and trains. Well done. Good stuff. If you're talking about healthcare, well, what did people learn? What was the biggest thing that people learned? I wonder, can you think of a word that begins with V that helped people stop getting infected? What about where people lived? Did that change? If you said countryside, they used to live in the countryside and they moved to cities. Well done, really, really good. Okay, and suggest positives and negatives. Well, I hope that you can do that for me in your copybooks. Okay, mind yourselves, boys and girls, and I will try to shut this off now. Any questions, please ask them for me. Thanks and bye.